You're the Lady of Winterfell.
Is that Polly?
I was never going to be as good a lady as you.
What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be color grading Game of Thrones. I'm going to show you guys two distinct looks from the show, a cold look and a warm look. It is a Song of Ice and Fire. I've also put a link in the description below to an article from Vox that shows you all the different colors of the show if you're into that kind of thing. I'm going to be grading this in Final Cut Pro, but you can follow along in a program like DaVinci Resolve or Premiere as long as you have some basic color grading functions and video scopes, including a waveform RGB parade and a vector scope. Okay, so first we're gonna grade for that cold look. And what I've done is I've taken a scene from season 7 featuring Arya and Sansa, and I have basically color corrected this and adjusted for white balance and opened up the dynamic range a little bit. I'm doing this rather than showing you guys a raw or a log file or something out of a DSLR, just so we are all on a neutral playing field here. Now, this isn't going to look perfect, but at least you get the idea. So I'm going to open up my comparison viewer, and this will allow me to see both frames. So the left is the original, the right has been color corrected and white balanced. There are a few immediate details I noticed right off the bat. The original footage is a lot darker, the skin tones have been muted and may or may not be accurate, and the whites are not balanced. So let's dive in. So the first thing to do is open up our video scopes and get an understanding of what's happening here in the original footage. I've opened up my vector scope. Now the vector scopes give us an understanding of what the color saturation is like. More saturated, moving out to these rectangles, less saturated, moving to the center here. In this line, you can see this is the skin tone line, so that helps us determine where to balance our skin tones. This is very saturated in the blue and the cyan range right here, and has virtually no other colors peeking out here. Next, I'm going to open up my waveform and I'm going to open the Luma. This is going to show me how bright and how dark the image is, the dynamic range. So we have 100 here, which is the IRE value. That's kind of the maximum we can go in terms of brightness of what's viewable from a TV before everything starts getting way blown out. And then we have 0, and this is completely black. So you can see this show is very dark, with the majority of the information happening down near black, and the highlights are falling really close to the midtones line. So everything has been pushed down. Third, I'm going to open up the RGB parade, and this is going to help me determine the balance of my 3 primary colors. You can see that everything is a little bit out of whack, skewed towards blue, and that makes sense because a lot of the shadows and a lot of the highlights feature a blue tinge to them. So I'm going to look back at my Luma waveform, and the first thing I'm going to do to the color corrected footage is push these highlights down. And to do this, I'm going to use my color wheels here. Now there's a lot of different preferences when it comes to color correcting footage. Do you use wheels? Do you use curves? Do you use levels? Well, I mean, it's all really the same. So I'm going to take the highlights here and drag these down a little bit lower than in between the 46 and the 75. So you can see my footage has gotten considerably darker, but it still does not have that blue tinge to it. Before I get into the colors, there is a slight adjustment to the midtones to be made. You can see here that the midtones are just a little bit darker. So I'm going to drag those down a bit. While I did that, my highlights were also pulled. So I'm going to drag those up and make a minor adjustment there. So that's pretty close. Now I'm going to open the RGB parade again, and this is going to give me an understanding of the color balance. Now the RGB parade, just like Luma, displays color information from left to right across the image. Now the first thing I notice is these highlights are uneven. Blue has been pushed up and red is down around 46. So I'm going to go over to my color corrected footage, and I am going to move the highlights towards blue and cyan. You can see that the blue starts to move, but you can see that red is still not quite there? Well, that is where tint comes in. Now, tint balances green and magenta. What is magenta? It is red and blue. So green is going to always opposite red and blue. And you notice that if I move the tint around, it is going to position green opposite red and blue. So I'm going to lower the tint just a little bit. Now finally, I need to account for the skin tones. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a mask around Sansa's face. And then I am going to open up my vector scope. Now it's really tough to see because the skin tones are very muted. They do skew slightly towards magenta. They're a little bit off. So I'm going to do this same thing to my color corrected footage. Now because we've decreased the dynamic range, you can see that this has also muted the skin tones, but mine are still on that line, just skewed slightly towards blue. So what I need to do is take my midtones and move them just a tad towards magenta. So let's have one final look at the vector scope to compare how we did. So it looks like we got pretty darn close. Let's have one final look in our comparison viewer, and there you have it, we're even.
You're the Lady of Winterfell.
Sup, thee.
I was never going to be as good a lady as you.
Thanks for joining, guys. If you're still interested in learning how to color grade the warm look from Game of Thrones, I'm going to actually be covering that in part 2 of this video. So don't forget to subscribe, and if you give me any feedback in the comments below, I'd be happy to answer some of your questions.